Thanks everyone for coming. Welcome back to another Resilience Growing live stream, one of the last ones of the program. So we're almost finished for the whole 14 weeks, which is very exciting. It's also kind of sad, but all good things must come to an end. Got 13 people in chat. We've got a few more people registered for tonight, so they're going to be coming through slowly. But we'll try to start as soon, close to 7 as we can, be nice and punctual. So I'm just going to start off as always, like we do with the acknowledgement. So I would like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm streaming from today. And I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that I'm streaming from land that was never ceded. So tonight's live stream is a little bit different to some of the ones that we've done in the rest of the Resilience Growing program. We've got 3 guests tonight, which is super exciting, all from the vertical farming or indoor farming space in Australia. So really excited to hear from all of them tonight. And we're gonna instead of doing presentations, we're more just gonna have a discussion about the future of food, about vertical farming and indoor farming, and sort of, all of that cool stuff. Got lots of cool questions lined up. So we're really excited for how that's going to all pan out. So we're going to be having a bit of discussion around some pre-prepared questions, but we'd love for you to put down some questions as well, if anyone in the audience has some, and we will do our best to get to those sort of towards the end of the live stream. And just a few little house rules. As always, we encourage people to turn their cameras on, if possible. But keep your mics off, just to avoid any sort of feedback and stuff. But yeah, keep your cameras on so that we can all see your faces. And we encourage everyone to chuck it onto grid view as well, so that you can, it's just cooler on Zoom if you can put it onto grid view and you can see everyone's faces and everything. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction of our guests tonight, but I don't want to take away too much of their thunder. I want to kind of let them speak for themselves. So first we've got Dilhan, who is the co-founder of Urban Plant Growers, which is a Sydney-based online urban farming store. We've got Hugh McGilligan, who is the CEO of Sproutstack, my apologies, which is also another Sydney-based vertical hydroponic farm. And we have Paul Millet, who's the co-founder and COO of Invertigro, another Sydney-based company that designs, builds, and supplies indoor and vertical farming technology. And the main takeaway from that is, why is all the vertical farming stuff happening in Sydney, I wonder? So what's so different about Sydney that makes it so popular there, eh? Maybe one thing we can discuss. But yeah, I'd love to hear from all you 3 as well, a little bit more about your backgrounds. And so if you could all introduce yourselves a bit more and your companies and what you do. And also we'd love to know why you got into this particular space of urban and indoor farming. So Paul, maybe we could start with you. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be here and part of the panel. Looking forward to the discussion tonight. So my background is engineering and manufacturing engineering, having worked in different companies globally, and spent a lot of time, I guess, in different supply chains as well. So I don't have a traditional agricultural background. I think more a modern farmer, if you like, and passionate about looking at our food system and bringing innovation to it in a way that we set up for the future. And I guess I've down tools on a consulting career to focus boots and all in this business, which is building what we believe is the future of indoor farming technology. So I guess, how did I get into it? A bunch of friends got together a few years back with a vision to build an indoor farm in Singapore. A company at the time was called Home Farms, and we looked around at the market, and we looked around at what was then and probably still is really an emerging space in terms of technology. And we looked at what other indoor farms at the time were doing and realised that there was a bit of a gap in terms of being able to develop and deliver capital efficient and operationally efficient indoor farms, and some of the challenges that we saw with what was available on the market, and home farms was face that challenge. And so we realised, that at our vision of solving, I guess our vision of building that model, and in solving some of those challenges, we realised that our core competence and our passion was actually in looking at bringing those solutions to enable others to leverage technology and become indoor farmers or enhance what they're doing, rather than us become a farmer and compete in that supply chain. So together with Ben Lee, co-founder, and he's our CEO, I established Invertigro in Sydney back in 2018, and our mission is to effectively develop commercially attractive, sustainable indoor farming solutions, and make those in a way that allows people to adopt them, scale up, and to make a technology offering that can be deployed pretty much anywhere, and to grow just about anything that can be grown indoors. And that's our mission really, is to build smart modular systems that can go anywhere, and to be able to grow a wide range of crops, effectively allowing a decentralized model to be established, and what we think of as sort of a microgrid type concept, where you can grow what you need, where you need it, and when you need it. So that's Invertigro, where we're building a couple of different products, which I refer commercial, so more B2C, B2B type applications, as opposed to direct to consumer, and looking to build systems that are both aesthetically pleasing, as well as highly functional as well. So that's our inverter wall product, which can go into corporate corporate spaces and food courts and so on. So there's a range of products that are evolving as well. A really exciting space, and good to be driving an Aussie business to tackle some of these challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a couple of cool things to tease out there, particularly what you're talking about, the decentralization, and that's hopefully something that we can talk a little bit about later. Thanks, Paul. Hugh, how about you? Would you like to go next?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for having me on board this evening. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. Let me talk about Sprout Stack to begin with. We are, as far as we know, Australia's only commercial scale vertical farm, which is to say that we are the only farm that sells produce that you can buy in a supermarket. Specifically, we sell in Harris Farm Markets. So if anybody in the audience is a Sydney sider and has access to a Harris Farm Market, I encourage you to go and buy the salad and report to me through the info line whether it's not the best damn salad you've ever eaten. Because I genuinely think it is. I genuinely think we offer a better product than is available currently from traditional agriculture. Certainly it's not able to be copied by a traditional grower. And it's a privilege to be a part of the future of food, and what we think is the future of food, and having a more sensible and productive use of the resources that are increasingly scarce and valuable. With regards to my journey, I am a bit of a blow-in. Both to Australia and to Sprout Stack. Sprout Stack's been around for about 4 years. I've been in the hot seat for about 18 months. And my job has been to commercialize Sprout Stack. I inherited a pretty cool backyard project that we have polished into a viable with profitability. I was like Paul, strategy consultant in New York City, And what led me to the light, it was a bit of a midlife crisis. I had a couple of kids, and I looked at the world that I was leaving them, and I was petrified of leaving a legacy of nothing more than selling people shit they didn't need. And so I made myself, through a series of serendipitous events, found myself with an offer of a job that ticked all the boxes of making the world a better place, doing something that's worthwhile and meaningful, and frankly, feeding my community really good quality produce.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. That's it's cool to hear that kind of journey from like something that perhaps isn't so life affirming work into something that is perhaps, like you said, you've found more of a purpose and a cause in, which is awesome to hear.
No. My life was very affirmed as a consultant. I was making.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean that.
That's a great time. I just wasn't leaving the world a better place.
Sorry, perhaps I was a bit heavy-handed. Well, thanks for sharing, Hugh. And lastly, we have Dilhan. Now, Dilhan has stepped in the last minute, so thank you to him. Unfortunately, Alina from Aerofarms wasn't able to attend tonight because of the time difference in the States. So Dilhan is here to speak with us today. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much, Farmel, for the opportunity to be part of this discussion. I've just been thinking lately about how few panel discussions there have been in the startup and sustainability space since COVID started. And it's really good to see something like this happening today. So I guess what we do, we're urban plant growers. We sell easy to use hydroponic products for a consumer market. So they range from like the size of a toaster to a milk crate, and then up to like maybe the size of a small bookshelf. Our whole problem statement was that hydroponics was an amazing technology that heaps of people were using commercially, such as Sprout Stack and Invertigro, but it wasn't very accessible to everyday people. There was a lot of jargon, there was a lot of technical words used and thrown around, and it seemed like a very hard thing to do. And in reality, for people to grow most types of crops, all they really needed to do was like plant a seed in a rock wool or vermiculite substance, and then add water and some hydroponic nutrients, and that could grow most things. So I guess we kind of set out with the mission of trying to solve that and communicate the value of something like hydroponics to a mass market. In terms of how I found out about it all and started the business, I first did hydroponics in a first year uni subject. I was doing mechanical engineering, and the whole problem statement was, how can you save water at home? And I just figured out hydroponics, you grow it, it uses 90% less water than conventional agriculture. You can optimize everything within the system because you can control every parameter. It's just a no-brainer. But I didn't really think about it for the next 3 years until I moved to Indonesia to do an internship in geothermal power generation. And I lived in a tiny student accommodation, like a high-rise flat with, no living things, just concrete walls. And it was just incredibly brutalist. And I was just like, oh, I really wish I could grow a plant here, but I face south, like I don't have any access to natural sunlight. So when I came back to Australia, I started tinkering with hydroponics, and I was like, oh, like, how do I do this? What do I do? I remember my very first hydroponic product that I made was a Vegemite jar with a hole in the top, a piece of rock wool added into that hole, and then some seeds, and some tomatoes eventually started growing. And then I slowly worked it to PVC pipes and then more elaborate things. And then eventually I met my business partner, Peter, who had a much more entrepreneurial mindset. And he had noticed that, heaps of people were moving into apartments and had the same problem as me. And we could solve that by communicating how simple hydroponics can be for everyday people to grow most of their own food. And I guess that happened 2 years ago. We've kind of grown a little bit, increased our product range, and started scaling a little bit better. But for the most part, like the process that I think we've found success from, which is add seeds, add water, add nutrients, the same amount, has stayed the same for 2 years. And I think that's why it's been successful. We've just made it so simple and straightforward.
Mm. Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing. It's cool, like how that, like you said, like it's the entry level into hydroponics can actually be very simple. That's in its most simplest form. The technology is very low tech and very easy to do at home with DIY solutions, but it has such awesome promise for people who want to grow food. And I think that's been one of the intentions of this program, the Resilience Growing Program that Farmall has been running and that we're speaking on tonight. It's about kind of leading people to that, that taking those first steps and then realizing that growing food is a constant journey of improvement over time, like as you would with soil growing, learning as you go and learning the land and all that. But yeah, thank you for sharing. It's so cool to also hear just how people find their way into this industry, because I feel like I can speak for myself as well. Like it often seems like people end up in urban agriculture who never intended to, and they kind of just come from all backgrounds, and it's very multidisciplinary, which I think is really awesome. It seems like it's a bit of a melting pot, which I find a really amazing part about working in this space. So thank you for sharing. Yeah. So yeah, I've got quite a few questions. Maybe we'll start with like this one about working towards a food system that is in line with the planet's limits. How do you see the role of vertical and urban farming changing in the future of our food systems? And as it grows, how will it integrate with existing growing practices? So right now it's kind of like fringe, and it's kind of, case studies, and a lot of this stuff, and particularly in an Australian context, is still picking up. Like you said, Hugh, you're potentially the only commercial hydroponic farm in Australia, which is crazy, but also kind of exciting as well. But, if we're looking at like 10 years in the future, 10, 20 years in the future, what is that integration going to be like with more common food systems and people's homes potentially as well? Does any three of you want to kind of weigh in on that with potential ideas?
Well, I'm happy to jump in. Right now, you're quite right. We're fringe and niche and high value premium type salads, and that seems to be a global phenomenon. But it feels like we are at a bit of an inflection point for the category. One in which you're actually able to drive a profitable business from growing hydroponically in close proximity to the markets in which the product is consumed. I don't see that changing much very soon, though. I don't see us ever. I see the growth and the establishment of hydroponic farms remaining quite niche for quite a long time, and being, you use a good word, integrated into the existing agricultural landscape and dynamic, which is to say, I've always thought of controlled environment agriculture as and vertical farming as complementary to, and in no way competitive to, traditional agriculture. And yeah, we can imagine a future with abundant free energy from renewable sources, and absolutely that favors controlled environment and vertical farming. But I think that's a little ways down the track as yet.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it's like that integration, like that slow kind of acceptance into the ways of doing things, and then slowly moving up alongside, so that hydroponics and vertical farming and indoor farming and urban farming is able to grow what it can grow best, and then work alongside a rural and traditional agricultural system that does what it does best, which is particular types of crops and lots of the staple crops and things as well. And yeah, Dilhan, I was wondering how do you feel like the introduction of the individual, the consumer, into that world is going to impact that shift over time?
The introduction of the consumer into the world of the broader food chain and decentralizing it.
Systems and through hydroponics and through what you guys are doing.
I mean, the way I think about it is a lot more about the personal connection to food. Like, overall, hydroponics will inevitably have to play a role in future food production, just because of its, 90% less water consumption, 90% less fertilizer use, 40 to 50% less space taken to grow the same amount of crops. Like, I think that will mean it's mathematically required to be part of the solution from what Urban Plant Growers does, which is sell consumer products. I think it's more about the personal connection to food and realizing that you can grow hydroponic food at home, which tastes just as good, if not better, than like a plant grown in soil. So I think for us, that's been a huge part of our mission, just getting people aware that you can even grow food without soil, and that it tastes great.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that kind of awareness sort of helps people understand more about how to grow food. And also, I feel like, and then a flow on from effect from that might be if more and more people are able to grow food in an urban context, and suddenly that opportunity is open to them, perhaps then they might actually consider a sort of a career in farming or growing food, or like they might fall into it more in the ways that we all have. And maybe that a company like Invertigro could come in and be able to sort of help set these new farmers of the future up with the tools necessary to just get started immediately.
I think it's an interesting one, and I agree with both you and Dylan that we've got the the pace of adoption at the moment. Seems like it's just getting started, and getting that connection of people at home realizing that actually this is pretty cool, and how good is this produce. There's a way to go to kind of get that user pull, I guess, or the market pulling through and saying we want this. But in terms of the food system and where it could be in 5-10 years time, I think the pace at which urban centres are sprawling and growing, and with that the loss of our best and most productive land, we're going to find the demand, and the urgency is going to, I think, almost exponentially grow. So I think you're going to see people starting to wake up pretty quickly and say, hang on, the traditional supply chains aren't necessarily going to cut it, and what are the alternatives? And particularly for perishable produce that that doesn't have the shelf life, it doesn't transport well, we need to be looking at growing that as close to the market as possible and as close to the plate as possible. And I think that's going to drive more pull and accelerate the the demand side, from the supply angle, in terms of people being able to adopt and set up indoor farms at a commercial scale. I mean, the challenge that SproutStack has faced in building and getting to profitability is not an insignificant one. I know it's a challenge that faced the world over, and things like energy prices and labour costs, and and then even just getting the sort of yield you need to make the technology and the businesses viable. We really need to be looking at finding those smart solutions and get the barriers to entry down so that actually more people can adopt the technology and make it work. And I think one of our goals is to be able to adopt these systems into latent spaces. So where you've got car parks that become available, where you've got a warehouse that all of a sudden becomes free. We see manufacturers closing down in this country. They can become the farms of the future. And so it's actually becoming more tenacious, I suppose, and looking at what's around us and what's available. And I 100% agree, that the urban farming model won't replace traditional agriculture. It will augment. And where you've got the crops, the staples that make sense to be grown, big broad acre applications or even greenhouses, and they transport well, they've got the shelf life, and they'll handle the road, then those kind of models will still exist, even your big fruit orchards and so on. But those that the crops that are that do grow best indoors and fast, and as Diane said, we can use hydroponics to accelerate the process and grow more efficiently. So I think the food system of the future will come faster than we think, or the demand for it. And as pioneers sort of in this space, it's pretty exciting. Certainly overseas, the wake up call is well and truly being shouted, and places like Singapore, they've realised through this whole COVID-19 situation that their strategy of 30 by 30, or trying to drive 30% local production by 2030 from pretty much zero today, or 5% maybe. Their call to arms is to get there faster. So so definitely, the calls there.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? It's almost like it's the sort of the need for industry, the sort of urban farming and vertical farming industry is certainly greater overseas. Yeah, that's kind of, there's a lot to unpack there as well. It's kind of like what you were talking about. It makes me think of like the removing the cost, or removing the barriers to entry. Seemingly, in my mind, it's like about making it. I mean, there's the cost problems, like the electricity costs and the land costs and all those things. But a big entry is just the initial sort of lump sum and the amount of investment that needs to go in the beginning in order to get started. And in my mind, it kind of seems like the best way to perhaps address that is small steps, so you kind of like, instead of aiming to produce tons and tons and tons of food right from the beginning, it's like baby steps, and you're growing a little bit and you're catering to a small market and you make that work. And then you sort of organically grow it from there. And that kind of ties into what we talk about, I guess, which is and what you guys have mentioned as well, which is the decentralization of our food system in the urban context. I mean, Paul, you have firsthand experience growing produce in this way. So maybe, is that something that you could weigh in on, potentially?
Yes.
Sorry, I meant Hugh. My bad.
Hugh's the farmer here. I'm doing some growing, mind you.
So I think it rather depends. Look, I have with Dylan for encouraging people to grow vegetables with hydroponic systems in their houses, and is the modern equivalent of starting a victory garden in your backyard, right? Growing veggies in your backyard. I think it's a brilliant idea. I think everyone should do it. Get back in touch with your food. It's great. I think that's very distinct from building a business and building a vertical farming business. And I think that right now, look, we're on a technology curve. And ultimately, we are preparing for this future where LEDs are much more powerful and much less expensive. Energy is abundant and free, if not super cheap, because it's renewable. And all of the other inputs into farming are vanishingly rare and expensive. We're not there yet. And so we are still very much stuck in the economics of farming, which is to say it's a scale game. And the economics of farming and FMCG means that you've got to produce enough to bring the marginal cost of production down below your cost of goods sold. That's how you build a business. And unfortunately, it's really, really hard to do that, as you alluded to, like bootstrapping your way up. Because LEDs are ridiculously expensive. The equipment that you'd use, I'm sure Paul wants to live handsomely and happily for the rest of his life on Invertigro's business model. He wants to earn money, and then if you're paying as a farmer, a grower paying rent or a license fee to Invertigro or even just a capex, you've got to offset that with higher prices. And unfortunately, the higher prices will necessarily outbid you from traditional agriculture every single time. Now, yes, on the long trend, we will win out because we're using less water, we're using less fertilizer, but as a business, if you're $3 more expensive than the lettuce that comes out of Gippsland or the Lockyer Valley, the consumer is always going to go for the more often than not will go for the cheaper produce. So the reality is we're at this inflection point, but it is still an awful lot of work to be done to get businesses off the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And like support, that support just doesn't seem to be there. And it's kind of interesting. I had a question around this, like how do we promote, like obviously we need a sort of more decentralized system, because monoculture and monocropping and all that stuff isn't really working for the planet long term. But like, my question is like, how can we how can we work together and support each other to ensure that we can create a sustainable, decentralized food system in a marketplace that currently promotes competition? So, the problem that you're talking about, Hugh, is that we're going up against traditional agriculture, and where the bottom line is so low that any kind of innovative technique that we use that is sustainably minded, that even if it just puts us up that fraction above the baseline cost of traditional agriculture, and puts us out of the running in that competitive space. And yet the world seemingly needs a decentralized system that requires more environmental input. So I don't know, Paul, maybe you're a good person to answer this question. Like, how can we promote that decentralization in a competitive space?
Yeah, good question. I think the model today, is very decentralized. Agriculture globally, and has traditionally been decentralized. You're seeing definitely in the indoor farming space some big players starting to appear in the States, and we almost had one on the panel tonight, where they're looking to build big centralized facilities to grow produce. I actually think that the commercials and getting the commercials right, as Hugh was saying, that technology curve where we are seeing, the cost of technology and the efficiencies, so both the CapEx and the OpEx impact of improved LEDs, and thinking about how we run a farm and capture the latent energy and tap into renewables. Those things that really impact the commercials, they need to be, we need to work on them to make sure that these type of farming solutions are viable, and then the awareness of and I guess the opportunity to stand up farms that can grow lots of different products in one location. So having the ability to produce what you need, when you need it, and where you need it, as opposed to big farms in one location and trucking them all around the country. And so our thinking and our strategy is to try and develop really flexible growing systems that can grow a wide range of crops wherever you want to put the farm. So that capital you've invested is not insignificant, but it certainly is able to grow the crops that would otherwise come a long distance to get there. You grow the stuff that isn't in season. So if the local farmers are growing basil, but you're importing coriander, then you focus on the coriander and you continue taking the basil from the local market. And it's really being smart about what you're growing and where you're growing it, so that the economics do work. And that's not trivial. It's actually having the technology that allows you to rapidly, the agility, to change crops and allow you to have that flexibility. And so our vision of decentralized urban farming is, or even just indoor vertical farming, that could be in regional, could be even in remote locations, wherever the population centres are, but growing what that centre needs.
Yeah.
And it's not something that's going to be solved, immediately for all scales. So you have to have, as you were saying, you need to get the economics right, and really small scale operations where labour starts to impact you, and you've got your fixed costs. You need to still understand what that sort of return versus your cost structure curve looks like. But I think there's lots of scope for this model to be deployed, and we're just at the very early stages of thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to clarify what I mean by decentralized, I'm talking about more and more smaller nodes of food production in the urban context, in order to take pressure off a homogenized larger food system that is, by its very nature, stressing the environment beyond the line that we can cross. And those smaller nodes of food production may be small commercial operations, or there may be people growing food at home for themselves, using technology from like urban plant growers, perhaps, or maybe even farm oil. Who knows? But yeah, those kind of yeah.
Can I chime in and be slightly contrarian here? Because I keep hearing the word decentralized, and I think we've got to divide what we think of as very worthy goals of getting people back in touch with their food and having people grow their own produce and having growing within community gardens, all very good. But ultimately, if you want to feed 10 billion people who are going to be on the planet in 30 years' time, you can't have a decentralized food system. You have to have a diversified food system that will include decentralization, will include these with these hubs, and hopefully, as we move down the technology curve, the scale required for a commercial vertical farming operation will come down. But right now, we have a break-even point of around 2 tons of produce per week. Within in order to make money as a farm, because of our labor costs, because of our real estate, etc., etc. That's not going to change. That's not going to change anytime soon, and that's growing high value, highly perishable produce locally to where it's consumed. We're never going to grow wheat. We're never going to grow soy. We're never going to grow calories. That has to take place in monoculture, and we have to get way more efficient about doing it. I have no objection to that, but we have to stop thinking that we're going to have these individualized pods and families feeding themselves in the backyard, because people aren't. We have an industrialized food system because it works, and it will continue to work.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. And I think diversified is probably a better way to think about it than decentralized, because decentralized sort of, I guess perhaps the thought is that there's no governing structure, whereas a diversified approach is like we know what's going on, and it is a myriad of approaches, but yeah, primarily sort of a larger body of agriculture. Good discussion anyway. I love it. It's good to hear all of your opinions. And I think now I'm going to move on to some questions in the chat, just because there's quite a few and want to get to those. So got a question from Serena. You're all based in Australia, where energy costs are through the roof and there are little subsidies from a government perspective. Furthermore, there seems to be a perceived lack of need for this early adopters of this tech due to our arable farming land and favourable weather conditions. Do you see your business expanding into other countries in order to reach scale and growth? Dilhan, do you want to begin answering that question?
Yeah, okay. So I guess for urban plant growers specifically, the cost of electricity and inputs isn't the biggest concern for most of our customers. Like for our smaller unit, it costs maybe $1 per month. And then right up to our larger unit, it may cost like $4 per month. So I think in that case, it might make a lot more sense for, I think like you'd be a lot more concerned about the cost of electricity if you were growing food industrially. But for us, it's more like, can I grow my herbs? Can I supplement my diet with some of the produce that I can grow in my indoor smart garden from urban plant growers? So I don't think that is as big of a concern for our customers in particular. I think for any plans growing overseas, I'm not too keen to expand yet. I think I want to figure things out a little bit better in Australia at the moment and try to solve the problems that we've got here, because I do feel we are quite far behind the rest of the world in some of these things. Like, I think we're like about 10 years behind the United States or Europe in hydroponic technology, and perhaps even a similar amount to certain countries in Asia. So I'd like to push Australia's mentality on hydroponics a bit further before expanding.
Great, thanks for sharing. Paul or Hugh, would you like to weigh in on that question of whether you would expand overseas given the Australian market and its challenges? Paul,
I'll jump in if you like, Hugh.
Yeah.
We've got a very different business to Hugh's, and our business absolutely is has its sights set on markets overseas for the reasons that Serena mentioned. Australia, has already has a big supply abundant produce and high energy costs and so on. But there is definitely the opportunity here to adopt the technology and make and to find the right the right types of products that do make sense commercially and to really help the Australian economy and the Australian market to grow. So for us, Australia is definitely a key focus to get started, and our business will and already is starting to set its sights on other economies and other countries that are further down the curve of looking at this as a real alternative, either because, as you said, energy prices may be lower in those markets, labour prices may be lower, or food security is a much bigger issue. There's a number of reasons, why Singapore is looking closely at this, and many other countries are as well. The Emirates and the Middle East. There's pretty much everywhere is looking at this. There's either issues with contamination of water, or there's mega cities that are being built and they need to be fed. There's many reasons for why this technology makes sense for the future. And so from Invertigro, we definitely have a global vision, but we do definitely want to make a big splash in Australia and help businesses here to adopt this technology and to set it up in a way that does make sense commercially for them.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's different depending on where you live in Australia, but yeah, I think a lot of the contexts in which we live in here in Australia are very different to those mega cities that you're talking about, and also places in the Emirates where the need for access to fresh food and issues with environment like water quality and things are perhaps more apparent, or are more apparent, and engendering that need for an interest in hydroponics. So yeah, I can imagine for a company like Invertigro, there's lots of sort of interest. I think it depends on where your sort of commercial, or where your interest lies. I think for Farmall, we're quite interested in education and empowering individuals, and we see a lot of that work can be done here in Australia. But Hugh, I have a question for you. The question that I thought would be good for you from Beck in the chat. She asked, are there any opportunities to retrofit inner city commercial properties with the change of cities due to the pandemic?
So I'm hearing this a lot. There are a number of people who are talking about converting, and it's not just the pandemic. There's people talking about converting garages because we're going to have we'll all be using autonomous shared vehicles in fairly short order, and there'll be no need for parking lots in cities. Yes, in principle. However, in order to get there, we've got to convert. I mean, of course, you can grow in the room behind you. Can you create a business from it? No, you can't. You can't grow a commercial quantity of vegetables in a small space currently, because in order to make that break-even point, you've got to automate as much as you possibly can, and you've got to scale large. And right now, the minimum scale for a farm is a lot bigger than the spaces that are going to come available from office space.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because there's no denying that is potentially a really interesting and creative future way of using space in the city to produce food that's hyper local, and but in terms of the actual commercial value and cost of that and the business sense, it just doesn't seem to work out. How much do you think that has to do with the value that people place on food, or do you think that is something inherent with farming? Maybe Hugh, you could expand on that.
It is unfortunately a reflection of the success of the industrialized food system, which is to say, we have all gotten very used to buying very cheap food and having a world of food available to us at pretty cheap prices. I mean, if you compare in terms of purchasing parity, what we eat these days and the variety of what we eat and the nutritional value of what we eat compared to what was eaten even 50 years ago, even 20 years ago, it's monumental, and consumers have unfortunately got used to it. So if we come in with a better product, and as I said, I challenge you, or rather I don't challenge you, I request that anybody tells me if they try a sprout stack salad, tell me it's not the best damn salad they've ever eaten. But that's genuine, because I really want to find out if I'm wrong about it, because I'm betting my house on it. But the truth is that unless I can tell a really good story about it, I'm always going to be more expensive than the food that people become to expect as a cheap bag of lettuce from Gippsland or Lockyer Valley or wherever, from this industrialized food processing system. That's not going to change, unfortunately. So yeah, it's always going to be a scale game for at least for a long while, and the scale does not favor the kind of decentralized systems of having these pods around, unless you're a business like Dilhan, which is like, empowering people to grow their own food and empowering people to grow for their neighbors. That's great. I really encourage that. But as a business, you've got to grow big.
I think, just to interject quickly back on Serena's question, one thing that I feel we should be conscious about is that Australian farmers are very unsubsidized because they're really, really efficient. Like, Australian farmers are good, and we shouldn't demonize them because they, for the most part, do a great job. I feel like the problem with that is that it causes the government to be less innovative in the farming area, because they've got less incentive to provide incentives to companies like, ours, because things are quite good as they are. Like, farmers are quite efficient. I think the other part is what would really tip the balance in favor of hydroponics and aquaponics and the technologies that we use would be a adjustment to the price of water rather than the price of electricity. I feel like water is ridiculously cheap in Australia for how valuable it is and how frequently we go into drought. And I just feel like if we were to reflect that value better in pricing, then hydroponics and aquaponics would just be far more viable. That's
a really good point. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's you hear all kinds of stories about the sort of tapping of the artesian basin and the rivers for agriculture and things. And yeah, it's I wonder. That's interesting as well that what you're talking about with the efficiency of the farmers. And like you, I totally agree with you that we don't want to, we have no intention of demonizing traditional agriculture, because it is, like you were saying, Hugh, it is effective and it works. It's like feeding lots of people. It's feeding the majority of the planet, right? But there's no denying that there needs to be a change, because inherently it's just not aligned with living within the planet's means. And I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like what we're all trying to do is kind of create a food system that is aligned with the planet's means, and it just doesn't seem to fit in within that sort of bottom line commercial value dollar thing, which is, yeah.
I think there will be certain pockets that are easier to fix first, like certain types of food and in certain locations where technologies such as the ones we use make more sense to grow that food and sell it, and it's more environmentally sustainable. But I do feel like for a long time there will be that large agricultural system that produces stuff like wheat and energy crops that you can't grow hydroponically or aquaponically.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm just gonna check in the comments, see if we've got any more questions. I've got another one here. So technology and measuring our impacts it seems like a key theme throughout all of the strategies of your businesses. How important is technology and innovation within the urban farming and vertical farming industry? And more so to that, like, why do you think that sorry. Why do you think that technology is more prevalent and communicated in urban farming than in conventional land growing? Does anyone, what do you think? What do you think that is, Paul?
Yeah, I think firstly, technology's advancing in all areas of agriculture, but I think that the application of technology in traditional farming and what we're seeing is very often technology to try and deal with climate, deal with the vagaries of what's coming at farmers and the challenges they face. So it's very often about predictive or looking at moisture content in soils, or it's looking at what's happening with the weather and how do we deal with that. Whereas the technology being deployed in indoor and vertical farming or urban farming is very much about controlling the parameters to get the optimal yield and optimal growth. Because we are in a controlled environment, that means we can optimize for the light that the plants are receiving, for the environment that they're in, and what sort of nutrients they're receiving and how frequently. So you want to deploy technology to, in our case, to make the system as foolproof or as simple as possible for people to adopt and deploy. And so that's where we're seeing the IoT platforms and the sensors and really the technology being deployed to try and make it as as consistent and as easy and user friendly as possible. And it's different, I guess, different types of technology as well as what you're doing in driving the system. But there's also Hugh mentioned automation earlier, because we do need to try and drive efficiencies. So the degree to which you can make the system as hands off as possible to make these sorts of farmers viable commercially is also an area that technology is being deployed for this type of farming.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it just seems by its very nature like growing food in the city requires technology in order to make work. Like as soon as we're going vertical, like it's and then leaning into that technology and harnessing the best parts of it, the automation, the sort of efficiencies side of things, without losing the sort of the soul of the food, I guess, and the mission of what we're trying to do. Just like to come back to a topic we were kind of talking about before, that you mentioned, Dilhan, with sort of the water. And maybe, Hugh, this is something that you could weigh in on. What do you think is the best step that our government can do to support a transition to a collaborative and regenerative local and rural food system? So what would you like to see from sort of the powers that be in order to support what you're trying to do?
Again, it's possibly quite contrarian. I am a committed capitalist, and I think the less government involvement we have in markets, the better. I think that we have an incredibly distorted global food system, in large part down to huge subsidies primarily for Chinese and American farmers, that completely warps the value of food, right? So ultimately, the best thing the government can do, as far as I'm concerned, is step out of the way, or rather perhaps create a level playing field for all farmers. So as Dilhan said before, you mentioned about creating a real fully loaded price for water would be a great first step. Likewise, a real fully loaded price for carbon would be another massive first step that would, and maybe even a price for soil, and actually factoring in all of those externalities into the market for agriculture, including environmental degradation and impact on wildlife. That would be a good way to honestly, you'd think there'd be an awful lot more subsidies for an innovative business. The amount of time that we've wasted chasing government support or talking to and with greatest respect to any government officials on the panel or in the audience, well-intentioned but completely fucking useless bureaucrats who promise big support but end up basically chewing up a ton of time and then tying us in red tape. So yeah, get out of the way. Sorry, that's probably get off my soapbox at this point.
No, but that's kind of interesting. I think that's kind of the answer I was hoping for, was like that real cost of the, you know, those resources that we're all reliant on. But while I may have some differing opinions to you in your affirmations of capitalism, I think I can agree with you that like we need to give those things like water and carbon and soil, which are actually underpinning all of the systems that we're reliant on, the proper value that they deserve, and factor them into economic calculations. It just seems absurd to me that so many of those things are just considered externalities and not measured in regards to those systems. And if once we can start doing that and really start taking on more of an ecosystems model approach to economics and the way that we govern our food systems and our money, you know, I think I could see systems like capitalism being able to function a lot better, because people will be able to sort of do the things that capitalism allows best, which is promote innovation while factoring in the real world costs of environmental impacts. But I could get off my soapbox now as well. So it's always a good topic to talk about. But anyone else want to weigh in on that before we do the nice question at the end? Or
yeah, I guess just adding a quick comment to that, I completely agree with Hugh's statement. It's about the economics, you know, like technology can save millions of tons of carbon dioxide, but if you create a good market mechanism, you can save billions and trillions just by fully loading and measuring prices correctly. That's my comment there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Awesome. Cool. So we're pretty much at the end of the hour, which is super cool. It's been great discussion. We have been asking everyone in the program that we've talked to and that we've worked with what they personally love or why they feel urban food or locally grown food is important. That could be more of a personal thing rather than a business thing, if you like. But yeah, if you could just quickly tell us what you think, why you think urban food is important. Maybe Paul, we could start with you.
Yeah, like I think for me, it's pretty similar to where Hugh started, thinking about kids and thinking about the future and trying to leave behind a planet that, you know, with resources that are limited, finite. That's driving me. I mean, I think we've got to do something to re-engineer, innovate the food system and make sure, you know, we protect the planet. So that's what's driving me.
Awesome. Hugh?
So yes, and it strikes me that most urban residents get a pretty shitty end of the stick. You know, the tomato, the quality of the produce that we are forced to buy because that's what's delivered to us by the big supermarkets is a function of an amazing system that came out of the Industrial Revolution, of, you know, massively urbanized populations, and then you have to grow on the periphery, and that's scaled to kind of ridiculousness. And there must be a better way, and it's exciting and a privilege to be part of that better way, or sustainability and leaving a better legacy aside, because I think that is important. That's my personal motivation. I think ultimately it's actually just providing a better product. And a more nutritious, more delicious, more varied, and more valuable food supply for Australian urban consumers as much as anybody else who've been getting a bad deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dilhan, would you like to close us off?
Yeah, I'd say, like, me personally, the reason why I grow my own food, the reason why I grow my own plants is just because we live such a fast-paced life. We work so much. We're always doing something. Like, time flies. It's been 6 months of 5. It's been ages in COVID so far. It's just flown like ridiculously quickly. But for me personally, coming home every day and looking at a plant that I'm growing and seeing an extra leaf or like a little bit of progress of flowers start to come out just keeps me grounded and keeps me present. And it kind of connects me back to what's actually happening. You know, I think that's the most important thing to me, that emotional, physical, human connection to a plant, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. 3 really good answers, I think. There, the future sort of taste and sort of mental well-being. I think those are all really good reasons to do what we're doing, and I would totally agree with all of you. Thank you so much for speaking tonight, all 3 of you. It's been really good discussion, and thanks everyone for joining. This has been a bit of an experiment for us, doing a bit of a panel, bringing together some heavyweights, if I can call you that, and having a chat about, well, Australian heavyweights, because who else is doing it? Like.
Calling you fat, Paul.
Yeah, fat bastard. Thank you for the opportunity, Farnwell. It's tremendous. I totally agree. Having more of these panels, more discussions, and we'll try and do the same down the track. Keep the discussion rolling, and it was great to be with you and Dylan as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah,
Sweet as. And Hugh and Dylan. Awesome. All right. I think that's it. Wrap up for tonight. Thanks everyone for joining, and catch you next week for our last live stream of the Resilience Growing Program. Don't miss it. See you later. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Farnwell, for organising.
That's all good. Catch you later. Bye.